I'm working with people who are in their 20s or 30s
Wow.
or 40s or 50s, and they've received a terminal diagnosis, and now their life's being cut short. And a lot of times they have a whole life. They have kids, and they have a house and a dog and a husband or a wife, and things are complicated because now their life is going to be cut short.
It all starts with a single question asked to an anonymous caller. What do you think happens when we die? And from there, the conversation goes in completely unexpected directions. Some speak with certainty, others with doubt. Some are still trying to make sense of it all. I'm Zach Ansell, and this is When We Die Talks, a podcast about death, meaning, and how that shapes the way we live. This podcast was born from my own fears around death and the need to talk about it. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. I'm glad you're here. This episode is supported by Mnemostheny, a project I've been building alongside this podcast. Mnemostheny is a simple way to tell your story in your own voice. It's a guided, audio-first conversation with me where we capture the parts of your life that matter to you, where you came from, the people who shaped you, the seasons that changed you, and the moments you don't want to lose. It's not therapy and it's not a performance. It's just a real conversation that becomes a private audio keepsake you can share with the people you love or keep for yourself. If you want to learn more, you can find it at mnemostheny.com. That's NEMOSCNE.com. Hey, welcome back or welcome here if this is your first time. This is one of the rare calls where I actually know our caller. We haven't met face to face, but I've known them through social media for a while, and I've always been impressed by how clearly and honestly they talk about this topic. They work as a death doula, and this conversation lands more on the practical side than some recent episodes. It's not intense. It's the kind of listen that can actually lower your shoulders a bit. We talk about what they've learned being close to death, what people often get wrong about the end, and what actually helps, and what doesn't. And even if you think you're nowhere near this in your own life, none of us really knows that. The caller shares that they specialize in working with younger people in situations where nobody saw it coming. And it's a good reminder that these conversations feel awkward until they feel necessary. Just making a few decisions ahead of time keeps people from guessing under pressure. At one point, the caller shares something I wish more people understood. Death is a human event, not just a medical one. And we talk about what that changes in really simple terms. Let's get into the call. I hope you enjoy.
Hello?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for doing this. You are one of the rare cases where I do kind of know who you are versus a lot of these calls where I don't. So I like to at least mention that up front so listeners know I have at least some background. But yeah, we are by and large strangers still. So this is a little bit of a different circumstance, but maybe the first thing that I'd love to hear from you is why you even wanted to talk to me about death. It is a conversation that a lot of people tend to avoid and not want to talk about.
For sure. So, I'm a death doula and I'm a death educator, and death is my favorite thing to talk about. And so I follow everybody death related on Instagram or all of the social medias for that matter. But Instagram happens to be where I stumbled across you. And so I've followed you on there for a little while, and I've watched some of your podcasts. And I don't know, it's just kind of something that I do where when I see somebody who's got a death related podcast, I'll just kind of reach out and be like, hey, I'm a death doula, and I didn't know if you'd like for us to chat on your podcast before. So that's kind of why I reached out to you, is because a lot of times when people are doing death related things, especially podcasts, they usually are pretty interested in talking to somebody like myself. I've experienced death or sat bedside with hundreds of people as they are dying. And so I've experienced death in a multitude of ways, but I'm also really passionate about educating about death and changing the narrative about death and just talking about death in general. And so I kind of love what you're doing because I really love anybody who is open and honest and ready to talk about death. A lot of people kind of think that death should live in the shadows and be something that we shouldn't really talk about. But, here you are with this podcast asking people questions about death and talking about death and not really being afraid to talk about it. So that's really why I wanted to, touch base with you and see if you wanted to connect.
That's awesome. And I also feel like now I need to say that I did not pay you to say any of that. The other thing that I love that you said was that death is your favorite thing to talk about, because that is very contrary to what most people would say. And so I love that you have kind of that thought process. And I love that you're going to bring this kind of background of understanding of sitting with death and being around death, because that is not a perspective that most people have, especially in the world today. But before we kind of jump into the full heart of the conversation and everything, maybe we can kind of get to know you a little bit, obviously keeping the anonymity going and everything. Usually what I like to ask is where you're calling from, roughly city, state. I guess calling from or live, depending if that's different. I don't know if that really matters, the distinguishing between the two. And then what your favorite book is and why.
Okay, so I'm calling from Cleveland, Ohio, and that is where I live. So I'm, one and the same. And I mean, I'll do a shameless plug right now if I can. My favorite book right now is my own book, because I'm in the process of writing my own book that comes out later this year in September. And it's a death doula's approach to intentional end of life care. So that's currently my favorite book.
Nice. I guess now we can kind of get into the heart of the conversation and start with the big question of what do you think happens when we die?
Great question. So I believe that we are all energy. And when we die, we are just making a transition, right? Energy never dies, it only changes. And so I fully believe that when we die, our energy just shifts or changes form into something else. I have never died, so I can't say exactly what our energy changes into. But, I have sat with hundreds and hundreds of people as they have labored out of life and made their transition off of this earth. And I believe fully that people's energy just changes and shifts into something else. All of the people that I work with as they're dying, I always tell them, I don't claim to know what happens to us after we die, but if there's a way that you're able to come back and see me or visit me in my dreams or leave me a sign that you're still here somehow, you have to do that. You have to show me that you're still here impacting my life in some way. And they always do, they always do that. So I see people in my dreams and they leave me messages, and I see signs all throughout my life all the time that these people that I've helped, through their final chapter of life are still here, just in a different way than they were when they were in their human form, when they were wearing their meat suit, they're just in a different form now.
Yeah, I love the term meat suit. It's so graphically disturbing, but also wonderful
Vulgar,
at the same
right?
time.
Yeah.
And so we know that there will be a transfer of energy, and our bodies, or I guess I should continue, our meat suits will decompose and all of those things, and that'll go back into the earth in one way, shape, or form, whether it is through actual natural burial processes, or even if you get cremated in your ashes, at some point, it all kind of comes back together. And so I think that energetically, that all makes sense. But one question that I always kind of follow up with, which I think it kind of always goes in tandem with this project too, is consciousness. And so it sounds like you believe that whether you want to call it consciousness, soul, spirit, whatever it is, that does continue. Because to some extent, the energy could get dispersed into the universe, and in a very different way, you could say we, carry on, but there's no self still, right? But it sounds like what you believe and have felt through these experiences is that self continues in some way.
So, I do believe that in some way, our energy or our soul or whatever we want to call it is still able to impact our loved ones that are still here on the earth, right?
Yeah.
So I've, met with or talked to tons of people who are mediums or psychics or whatever we want to call that. And they always say the same thing, that, once we die, our energy is still here, with our loved ones, still impacting our loved ones, just in a different way, but almost in a more meaningful way. So I actually had a medium once say that, how sometimes you'll get just a really random thought, or you'll have an intuition or a feeling in your gut. Well, I once had someone tell me that those are never just random. Somebody is putting those feelings inside of you, or helping you out, or leading you along the way in your life, kind of giving you these ideas of hey, maybe you should do this, or hey, something's wrong with that, or hey, this is off. So I do believe that in some way, and I don't necessarily know how or which way.
Yeah.
But I do believe that, if you believe in that, that our energies are still able to impact our loved ones after we're gone.
Mm.
And I always like to think that I am kind of like a testament to that, if you will. I work with all of these people that I've helped labor out of life, and I always tell them, to come back and guide me on my journey. I'm on this journey, to build, change the face of death care and to change the narrative about death and dying and to educate all of these people about death and dying. And, in just a few short years, I've done some really amazing, incredible things. And I believe that I've been capable of doing that because there are forces bigger than myself helping to guide me along the way. So that's just my thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, I love that. I love this kind of idea that we have these like spirit guides, I guess. I don't know if that's a great word for it or a great
Yes.
term for it, but yeah, these kind
No,
of.
it's a perfect. Yeah.
I always get worried about.
Perfect word
I
for
think there's always a little concern on my end of the word choices and the phrases that I use because I don't want to I never want to be like saying something or putting a term out there that then affects the conversation in a way or even like how listeners view things. Like I don't want it to sound like biased or partial or in any way. Like I'm very curious, and I think I can kind of loop this into my next question a little bit. I started this whole thing because I had some deep fear around death and anxiety around death, and I felt like I needed to talk about it with someone, and now I'm talking about it to a lot of people and talking about it way more than I ever thought I would. And so I kind of already assume I already know the answer to this first question. Do you have a fear of death? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I don't fear death at all. I believe that it's just a natural transition in life, just like birth. I mean, I look at death just like I look at birth. I almost look at it with the same respect and beauty, as I do birth. Every single one of us on earth is going to die. 10 out of 10 of us, it's what our bodies are literally born to do.
Yeah.
And our bodies know how to do that. It's what we're here for almost, to live and then to die. So I don't have a fear of death. I have my death meticulously planned. I know what it'll look like to a point. Of course, I don't know how I will die, but
Yeah.
who I want to be there and things like that, given that it's not kind of a tragic death. But even if it is a tragic death, then it's quick and painless and fast. I can't say that I don't fear suffering because, there are terminal illnesses that include a lot of, sickness at the end, and nobody
Yeah.
likes to be sick and to have to slowly decline. That part definitely would not be fun. So I think that dying is the easy part. If I were to get cancer and have to spend years kind of being sick and going through chemo and a lot of medical issues, I would hate that part. But the dying part would actually be the easy part.
It's the
to me.
release.
So
Yeah.
I don't fear. Yeah, absolutely. I don't fear death at all.
I kind of assumed that was kind of where you stood. And I feel like the things that you shared are a good reminder of someone who sees it very frequently. It's nice hearing and comforting hearing that from someone who is close to it in ways. And maybe that is an interesting thing to jump into because I think death doula has become this kind of, I don't want to say like hip, but I feel like it's something that's becoming much more mainstream, or at least part of like the common vernacular. But I still think that there's a lot of people that don't really know what that means and how does a death doula differ from a hospice nurse versus, I don't know, other kind of types of work along the same lines. And so maybe it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about, and I'm sorry, you probably talk about this all the time, but I don't think I've had a death doula on here actually just share about what a death doula does. And I know that's a big term too. Like I know it encompasses a lot.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy to explain that. That is one of the biggest questions that most people have is kind of how does a death doula differ from hospice?
Yeah.
And it's something that's important for people to understand. So I love to kind of explain it. We work beautifully alongside hospice, right? So hospice handles the medical aspects of death and dying. They help to keep your body calm and comfortable. They provide medications. they help your body to labor out of life, they're absolutely necessary. You absolutely want to work with hospice at the end of life. A lot of people have ideas about hospice. Some people are afraid of hospice. I can never advocate for hospice enough. I always want all of the clients that I work with to work with hospice at the end of life. Now, a death doula differs because dying isn't just a medical event, and that's something where we've been kind of led astray. We always think, oh my gosh, someone's dying, get them to the hospital or get hospice aboard. And yes, great, maybe you do need a hospital and you definitely do need hospice. But dying is much more of a human event than it is a medical event. You need more human support than you need medical support. So that's where a death doula comes in. We don't do anything medical at all. We don't provide any medications. We don't provide any medical support, but we provide all of the rest of the support. So we're coming in and we're helping you with your end of life planning, and we're helping you to get autonomy over your own death. We help you to create a death plan. We help you to do a legacy project. So they say that each person dies two deaths, once when you physically die and once again when you're spoken of for the last time. So we help you to think about what type of legacy do you want to leave behind for those people that you're leaving behind. And then we can help you with that. We can help you to create something tangible that you can leave behind for your loved ones. I always like to put it plainly, hospice helps the body to labor out of life, and a death doula helps the soul to labor out of life. And when you work with both of us, you get just an absolutely well-rounded, most beautiful end-of-life death experience that you could possibly have. As a death doula, I usually come into the picture well before somebody is working with hospice. In order to work with hospice, you have to have been given a terminal diagnosis with 6 months or less to live. Per insurance requirements, that's kind of how that works.
Gotta love insurance.
If you have, yes, right. So if you have more than 6 months to live, you can't work with hospice. But for death doulas, we don't work under insurance requirements. You can work with a death doula at any time in your life. And so a lot of times people will maybe get a terminal diagnosis, but they've been given a year to live. And so you are like, okay, well, I got this terminal diagnosis, but I'm not ready for hospice yet. But there's like a lot of stuff on your mind. And maybe you've got, a family, and I need to start preparing my family and start preparing myself for what the rest of my life is going to look like. And so you can start working with a death doula then. And then as a death doula, we're very educated about hospice and everything that they do. And as I mentioned, I always advocate for hospice, and I always want people to bring hospice aboard. So I'll start working with my clients, well before they're ready for hospice. But then when they get to that point that they are now ready for hospice, I can help to educate them about hospice. I can help them to arrange hospice services, help to bring hospice aboard. And then we can work really beautifully together to make sure that everything works out perfectly and you have, dare I say it, a beautiful end of life and death experience.
Which is what we all want, right? Or hopefully. I love that distinguishing between the two. But one of my favorite things that you said is death is a human event. It's not a medical event. I think that is a really beautiful way of looking at it because I feel like I'm always kind of hitting on how poorly we look at death, especially in the West. And if you had those two statements up next to each other, death is a human event, death is a medical event, I think if you polled 100 people, by and large, most people would just say, oh yeah, it's a medical event because we're not close to it anymore. We don't talk about it. We don't experience it. It's so kind of hidden. And so I love that. I love that phrase a lot. Kind of coming back to the death doula stuff, do you kind of have a specialty in it? I know like some people do focus on, like I'm a death doula that like really focuses on legacy projects. Do you feel like you kind of have a specialty or are you kind of like a little bit of like able to do it all?
So I'm actually an RN too.
Okay.
I worked in healthcare for well over a decade. So I am kind of able to do a lot of stuff, but because of my RN background and spending a lot of time working in healthcare, I'm really able to kind of get in there and just be hands-on with people. A lot of the clients that I work with, and this wasn't necessarily the specialty that I chose, this is kind of
It
I
chose
told you
you.
that, yes, it chose me, like that's kind of what happened. The universe chose this for me for sure. But the majority of the clients that I have received a terminal diagnosis like cancer,
Hmm.
and they're at a younger age. So I'm not
Okay.
working with people who are elderly. I'm working with people who are in their 20s or 30s
Wow.
or 40s or 50s, and they've received a terminal diagnosis, and now their life's being cut short. And a lot of times they have a whole life. They have kids and they have a house and a dog and a husband or a wife, and things are complicated because now their life is going to be cut short. And so I'm helping not only the dying individual, the person who's received this terminal diagnosis, but their whole family understand and accept and plan for and go through the fact that this person that they love so much is dying at a younger age. So that's kind of my specialty. But I'm also an educator. So I opened death doula school, and I actually train death doulas.
Oh,
So I
awesome.
train people who want to become a death doula. So I've trained hundreds of death doulas across the whole world. I've reached other countries, and so I'm juggling many different things between working with clients and training new death doulas and writing books and all kinds of stuff. So I have a few different specialties, I guess you would say.
Yeah, that sounds like being a small business owner in 2026, is that you have to do like a million different things. I was very curious. I
Absolutely.
was going to ask more about the transition from a nurse to a death doula, but then you kind of brought in this like really interesting information about working with younger people who are dying. What are the things that those people should actually be thinking about and preparing? Like, I know you said you have your full death plan and everything, and so what are the things that you think are important to consider and think about that would be helpful?
I love to remind people our age of a few things. First of all, death does not discriminate. Death does not care how old you are. It doesn't care what you have going on in your life. It doesn't care what color you are, what gender you are. If you're about to have a baby, death does not discriminate, and it will come for you when it's going to come for you, regardless of what you've got going on in your life or what age you are. And the other thing I wanted to say to the people who get nervous, like when you talk about death and they're like, oh, don't say that, don't say that. Talking about death doesn't bring it on any more than talking about sex will make you pregnant, right?
Yeah, I
You can
love this
talk
line.
about death all day long. Yeah, you could talk about that all day long. And listen, if you go to my Instagram page, I talk about death all day, every day, and I am still here.
Yep.
So, I am proof that isn't true. But this is a very, very important and great question that you ask, because there are so many things that people should be doing the second they turn 18. We have no idea when death will come for us. And so as soon as you turn 18, you should really start thinking of your end of life planning and, even start getting it in order, just because you never have any idea when that will happen. All right. So what does end of life planning include? When you're 18, it might be a little too young to start doing your estate planning because you probably don't own many things, right? But once you own things, if you own a house, if you have belongings, then yeah, you do need to start meeting with an estate attorney and get a will in place and figure out what would happen to your things if you were to die sometime in the near future. But something that's really important for all of us who are adults is deciding who would be your medical power of attorney. And that means who would make medical decisions for you if you could not make medical decisions for yourself. So let's say I get into a car accident later today and I'm incapacitated and I can't make medical decisions for myself. Who is going to make medical decisions for me? It defaults into, depending on what state you're in, it would default into your spouse if you have a spouse. If you don't have a spouse, then it would default into your parents if you have parents. And then there's kind of a whole list of people who would get to make decisions for you. But that just depends on, are those people going to be able to make the decisions that you would want made?
Yeah.
What if your spouse wouldn't make the right decisions for you? Or what if your parents wouldn't make the right decisions for you? Do they have any idea what decisions you would want made? What if you're on a ventilator for months and months and months and your body is no longer able to sustain life? Would you want to be able to just let go and be able to naturally die? But what if you never had these conversations with your people and they didn't know? And what if they let you live on a ventilator forever and ever and ever because they're unable to let you go?
Yeah.
And so while it seems dark and while it seems grim, it's important to have these thoughts and to have these conversations with people and to figure out who would be your medical power of attorney and get to an attorney and get your medical power of attorney in place so that if something ever happens to you, you've got these things in order. And not only having them legally in order, but having these conversations. You said that you've been talking about death more. It's not really dark and morbid to do that. It's wise to do that. And it also will help to decrease your fear and anxiety about death. The more you talk about it, the more you learn about it, the more educated you become about death, and the more that you plan for it, the more that you take autonomy over your own body and your own person and your own death, the more your fear and anxiety will reduce. The reason that a lot of us are so afraid of death is because it's something we're not allowed to talk about. It's something that nobody teaches you about. I fully believe that we should learn about death in school.
Yeah.
It's something that every single one of us is going to experience. They'll teach you about calculus and algebra in school. You probably won't use calculus and algebra in your life, but you know what? You are going to experience death. Your grandparents are going to die, and you're going to experience that. And you're not going to have any idea what to do with that because nobody ever taught you how to deal with that. A lot of people are going to experience the death of their parents. Some people might experience the death of a sibling or a best friend.
Yeah.
And nobody ever taught us how to deal with that. These are things that we should be taught, every single one of us, because we are all going to go through it at some point in our life, not only our own death, but the death of our loved ones.
Yeah, I think there's so many things that I've learned doing this project and now just talking to strangers. We don't really know how to sit with someone else's discomfort because we don't really like to be uncomfortable. And so we want to do something. We want to be able to fix it. I don't know. I was a math major and I remember asking at one point, when am I ever going to use this in real life? And the teacher responded, well, if you go to grad school. And I was like, I'm not going to go to grad school for this. I'm just trying to get my degree and get out of here. And so there's so many things that I think we can look at the education system with learning how to budget money. And that's getting way off topic, but
you're so right. Why don't they teach us about doing taxes? And
Totally.
Stuff, stuff that you actually are going to have to deal with.
Death and taxes, and I think you're 100%. And I don't know where this came from, but it's this idea that, and I hate when I'm like, I saw this thing on Instagram. I always feel like such a not interesting person when that is the way that I bring something into a conversation versus I read it in a book or something.
You got to just lie and be like, I read
this thing in the book, but I think once I say this, everybody's like, oh yeah, I saw that same video. Or maybe it's because my Instagram is so filled with death stuff that's why I see it. But I think it was a gentleman talking about how he thinks right out of high school, everyone should have to volunteer at hospice. You should actually have to be around death and see what it's like. And I think that's a wonderful idea. Obviously that's not going to happen, but we have to find ways to talk about this. And this is my weird way of trying to do it. Because I think there's so many wonderful byproducts that I found from it. I think sitting with discomfort is something that's come from it. And I think there's all these kind of heavier things that you can say that come from it that I do think are beneficial. And that's probably why we'll never teach about it in school because there'd be too much good that would come from it.
I always say that, making peace with death and the fact that you're going to die is how you live your most meaningful life. It really is. Sitting with death every day and listening to people's regrets, their deathbed regrets, is how I live my best life every single day, because those same regrets that I hear over and over again, I spent so much time working and I never went on vacation, or I didn't spend enough time with my family, or I always talked about traveling, but I never did it. Or, I was always caught up in the wrong things, or I was living my life for other people's expectations instead of doing the things that I wanted to do for my own life.
That one is the most heartbreaking to me. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that one always gets me of just I wasn't my authentic self. Oh, that one's heartbreaking to me. Sorry, continue.
Hearing No, you're fine. But hearing those over and over again, like it reshapes my life. And then also seeing people my age die, seeing
Yeah.
people younger than me die, like that helps me to wake up every morning and be like, man, I am so lucky that I'm here. And it really changes the way you look at everything. It takes away fear. It helps me to do the things that I want to do instead of being like, oh, I wish I could do this or I wish I could do that. I can. I can do anything that I want to do. If I want to do something, I'm going to do it because I'm only here for a little bit of time. I don't have any idea how long
Yeah.
I'm here, but however long I'm here, I'm going to do whatever the heck I want to do because that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to live my best life while I'm here. And I always say that I hear these regrets over and over again from people on their deathbed. And it's kind of like my goal to make sure that when I'm on my deathbed, you're not going to hear those regrets from
Yeah.
me. I'm going to sit on my deathbed and I'm going to be like, man, like I did it. I lived my best life. And one of my favorite practices to do every day is to take a moment to sit with my dying self.
Mm.
Imagine that you of today is sitting on the deathbed of you, many years from now who's dying. What is he going to look at you and say? Is he going to be like, man, I'm so proud of you. Like you did really awesome things with your life today.
Yeah.
Or is he going to be like, why are you wasting your time? You don't have a lot of time here and you wasted today on the dumbest stuff, And it's really powerful because I live every day making sure that I'm making myself proud so that
Yeah.
my dying self is always proud of what I spent my time doing.
Yeah. That's kind of how I started this journey a little bit. I started doing like death meditations, and that led into, me just like trying to gain some comfort around it. I like this daily idea of like a check in with my future self. I think that's a wonderful exercise. I assume a response that you get a lot of the times when you say that you're a death doula is, how do you do that? That's got to be so hard. That's got to be so depressing. That's got to be so overwhelming. And I'm by no means comparing what I'm doing on this podcast to what you are doing. You're doing real work, but I do get similar questions of like talking to people about death. That's got to be so depressing. That's got to be so heavy. But I'm curious what your experience around that is, because I'm sure you get similar responses.
Yeah, I always get that for sure. And maybe the feeling that you're feeling is that you feel a little fulfilled or something,
Yeah.
right? Because whether you realize it or not, you're doing something positive. You're making a change in the world by doing a little bit of what I'm doing. You're changing that narrative that death is something that we shouldn't talk about or that we can't talk about. And you're probably making an impact in people's lives by letting them know that it's okay to have these conversations and to talk about this and that we don't have to keep it inside all the time. But I do get that all the time where people are like, man, that must just be so depressing and so sad. And how do you do it? And for me, it's the exact opposite. I've never been happier in my entire life. I mentioned that I was an RN and I worked in nursing and in healthcare for over a decade. And when I worked in healthcare, I was my worst self. I was burnt out. I was treated terribly by everyone in healthcare because in healthcare, they don't care about you. They want you to work as many hours as possible, and they don't care if you have a family, and they don't care about you personally. They don't care if you're burnt out. All they care about is that they have enough nurses on staff that the administration doesn't have to deal with it. But then I became a death doula and I got to, really connect with people and really work with people in a truly, truly meaningful way. And I believe that this job, if that's what you want to call it, it's my purpose in life. This is what I was meant to do. This is written on my soul. And so I feel like I'm truly aligned, with, I don't know, with the universe or whatever it is that I'm supposed to be doing. And when I help somebody to have their best death, to labor out of life in the most meaningful and comfortable way possible, there is nothing more fulfilling in the world than that. And it's never sad and it's never depressing at all because, that was the goal all along, was to help them to die their best death. And I got to help them do that. And not only did I get to help them do that, but I got to be there for their family to make sure that their family stayed whole through something that was really, really hard. And every single time I do it, I know that I made a positive impact. I did something really great that would have been so hard and depressing if I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so it always leaves me feeling better than anything else that I've ever done in my life. So yeah, I don't know. It's not depressing for me. It's the best thing I've ever done in my life. And like I said, it's truly my sole purpose in life is to do this and to help people through this, and to really bring awareness to death and the fact that all of us die, and that maybe I did this in a past life or something like that, because now that I'm doing this as an adult, I look back and it's something that I feel like has always been in me ever since I was a child. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at my grandma's house, and she lived by a cemetery. And, my friends were always going to the mall or going to the playground or doing what kids do. And I hung out at that cemetery all the time. That's where I felt comfortable. That's where I felt safe. There was like a morgue there. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world to go like hang out in this morgue where there was like dead people behind the walls. And my friends just, they thought I was absolutely insane, because who would?
So you're used to it.
Child who yeah, absolutely. Like, this is just who I've always been. This, even since I was young, I've always been the death girl.
Yeah.
I just didn't know what to do with it, and I didn't know what it was called. And then I went into nursing, and when I went into nursing, I initially went into nursing school thinking that I wanted to work in labor and delivery and help to bring people into this world. That was kind of my goal. But then my first job out of nursing school was working in a long-term care facility, which is people who are at or nearing the end of life.
Yeah.
And right away, I started experiencing death. And I just never left. It was like I knew right then and there, like, I think that I'm supposed to help people exit this world as opposed to enter this world. So yeah, it's just always been there in the background of my life. It's always been something that I was supposed to do.
Yeah. I love that you've it just always felt like it was there, and you found your way. And I think that's how life works sometimes, right? I think that's how life works a lot of times, actually, is that you kind of do other things, but there's just always kind of this pull towards what your true purpose is and what you really are meant to do. I like to close out with one question that I ask everybody, so it kind of maybe bookends it a little bit. And so, what's one thing you still want to experience in this life?
There's lots of things that I still want to experience, but one of the biggest things I want to experience is traveling in a big way. Right now I'm building my business and my kids are still young. So while we do travel here within the United States, it's kind of hard to do a lot of international travel with young kiddos.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of something that I picture myself, should death allow me to get older in age, once my kids are grown and out of school and kind of doing their own thing. That's something that I picture myself as doing a lot of international travel, because there's so many different cultures out there and I want to learn about them in person.
Yeah, firsthand.
I want to experience them. I want to travel, to all of these different countries and really see everything just, and take it in and truly experience it. That's one thing where on my deathbed, I want to be able to tell my death doula all about it. Like, man, let me tell you about this one time I went to Greece, and let me tell you about when I visited Belize, and let me tell you about when I went to Costa Rica, and let me tell you about Australia and Ireland.
And they'll be like, I gotta go.
I want to tell them all the stories. Yeah, I know. They're like, all right, but
enough.
That's something that I really, really want to experience.
Is there one spot on the top of the list, or is it just almost impossible to pick one?
There isn't even. I mean, I don't even know. There's so many, and honestly, it changes.
I was gonna say day to day for me too.
Right now, and then it'll change. I'll see a video about something new. I'll quote unquote read about in a book. I'll read about some new place, and I'll be like, oh, that's where I want to go next. Oh, I got to go there. I've always wanted to go to Australia for sure. Africa would be so cool to visit. I mean, all of these different places for sure.
I want to do way more traveling as well. And maybe it'll turn into a worldwide book tour. Maybe you can end up doing a worldwide book tour. I don't know how those work, but that seems like a very cool thing to do. So maybe that's what'll happen.
Yeah, let's start speaking that into existence.
I'll start working on it over here. You work on it over there, and we'll see if our powers combined can make it happen.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for being willing to do this, for reaching out. Like I said, I've been following you for a long time, so it was nice to connect and chat and hear more about you and your story. Sorry if some of it was kind of the same questions you get asked a lot. But yeah, it's a perspective that hasn't come up on here, and so it is interesting to hear about that. And then I think also there are continually, like, episode to episode, if people listen to every episode, I think there's definitely stuff that I harp on, and it's, you don't know when you're going to die. And so might as well live. I don't want to say without regrets. I don't think that's a possible way to live life, but, live intentionally, live not with all this constant future thought. And I think another one that's come up a couple times recently, because I've talked to a couple medical professionals, is it's not the exciting stuff, right? But it is the practical knowing what you want at end of life. And so I love that you were able to speak to that too, because I think you are working with an age demographic that is starting to get to a point where, I know for me, it's like, oh yeah, things are starting to hurt a little bit more. Injuries don't heal either as fast or at all. And so it's like the idea of death is starting to creep in for people in this age demographic, but by and large, the high majority aren't thinking about it. And so I love that you're able to speak to that too. And these things that how many people think about at 18, hey, I should start kind of figuring this stuff out. But yeah, I just want to thank you for touching on that stuff, because I can harp on it a little bit, but it's better when I have professionals and experts and other people talking about the stuff that I think it's important for people to hear.
For sure. It's all my favorite topics. So I'm happy to answer all your questions.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And who knows, maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point, and I don't know, we'll come up with something else to talk about. But thank you again. It was wonderful chatting with you, and I hope you take care.
Thanks much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
What I'm taking from this one is how grounding it is to hear someone speak about death without turning it into something tense or overwhelming. The caller has been close to a lot of endings, and they don't sensationalize it. They keep coming back to what's simple and human, what actually helps, what doesn't, what people get wrong when the conversations only live inside hospitals and paperwork. And that line they offered really does feel like a reset. Death is a human event, not just a medical one. I keep thinking about how much it changes when you start from there. The tone gets softer, the decisions get clearer, the fear gets a little less loud. And even if you think you're far from any of this, the timeline is the part none of us gets to know. So I hope this episode felt like a nudge toward the kind of preparation that's actually care. A few conversations, a few decisions, less guessing later. As for what's coming up, we're at a pretty interesting moment in the timeline of the show. Next week is the 50th episode, which still doesn't fully compute to me. I thought a lot about doing something special, but with everything else I'm building around this project, it felt better just to keep doing what the show does best. More anonymous calls. I think I know which call I'm going to be using for 50, but I've been recording a lot lately, and sometimes something comes in and you just know it needs to be shared right away. After that, there'll be one more episode, and then I'm going to take a week off to reset a bit and get ready for the next stretch. Thanks for listening to this episode of When We Die Talks. These conversations don't offer answers, but they do open space. Space to reflect, to feel less alone, and maybe to see things a little bit differently than before. If you'd like to explore your own beliefs out loud, you can apply to be an anonymous caller at whenwedietalks.com. And if a full call feels like too much, the voicemail is always open. Leave a message at 971-328-0864 and share whatever death has stirred in your life. Listener support truly helps keep this project going. If you'd like to support the podcast, you'll find a link in the show notes. And as always, please like, share, and follow. Every bit makes a difference. Until next time, have a good life.